Whether you like performance and you want to rip around on the trails or even cruise the city streets, Varla's Eagle 1 Pro is something you can use to either do just that, or if you want to just do straight commuting or even just take in the sights, this is a scooter that really should be on your top 3 list. Now there have been a few changes to the Varla Eagle 1 Pro, not too many, but we will discuss those. This is something I've been riding around for the last several days, putting over 50 miles on it, so I can give you a few ideas of what I think about this. Now, just to get some of the basic information out of the way, this is a dual motor, 1,000 watts a piece. So this is 2,000 watts of power. Whether you're a beginner or an experienced rider, this can provide something for both. The Varla Eagle 1 Pro will come with a 60 volt, 27 amp hour battery. Now this 27 amp hour battery, if it was completely dead, it could take up to 14 hours to charge, but it does have 2 inlets for charging. It only comes with 1 charger. So this is something you'll have to decide if you're using this and commuting a lot and you need to supercharge this, you will want 2 chargers. Now the range of this scooter is supposedly about 45 miles, but keep in mind that is going to be under the best conditions. That's going to include anything from temperature, also the rider weight, the amount of hills that you might be riding around, and also the speeds. Just like a car, if you're always going fast, your mileage is going to decrease, but I'll give you how much range I was getting out of a couple tests. Now during my riding experience, I did have on a lot of gear because this is a faster scooter. It has a rated top speed of about 45 miles an hour, but as you can see here on a couple of the speed tests I did, I was consistently hitting upper 30 mile an hour, but I did reach a peak top speed of 42 in one test and pretty much 41 miles an hour repeatedly. And that's about 215 pounds with all the gear, including the helmet, not to mention some camera gear that I took with me. Now when it comes to riding this scooter, it does have 2 modes. You can put this in dual motor, which is going to give you that 2,000 watts of power, or you can put it in a single rear wheel mode. Now this is going to be much better for the beginner riders because the power is not so abrupt. This makes your throttle response a lot more linear. That way it doesn't have quite so much of an abrupt takeoff, and it's also not so much abrupt on the mid-range too when you go to take the throttle from 0 to 100%. So this allows the scooter really to be something you can grow into if you are a beginner and you're kind of scared of those top speeds. This allows you to get used to it, and then as you're ready for more power, you can click on that double motor, and then you can really increase those speeds, especially if you live where there's hills. This is where it shines, is that the dual motor can accelerate you up those hills so much quicker. Now there are a couple of new things that Varla did include on this scooter that I got. This one does have a little bit of a different control center, as they did change this. It's pretty much now just 4 buttons that are straight up and down, which you can actually hit this a lot easier with your thumb to be able to change the modes. Another thing they did change was the kickstand. This is much more beefy and a much better design versus the first one that came out a couple years ago when this was first released. Now when it comes to rider experience on this scooter, because of its 4-inch wide tires and 11-inch tall tires, this really gives you kind of a sense of security. This does include a steering dampener in the neck. Now this may make the steering seem a little bit stiff at first, but you'll actually realize this is really important, as when you do get up to higher speeds, it controls steering wobble. This is something that can occur when you are in those higher speeds. You can get a little bit of head shake up on the bars, but I found this is really only at your highest speeds and under some roads that are not in the best conditions. And this is something you're going to want to be a little bit more experienced if you're going at these speeds. This is something you learn to deal with as you become a better rider. And now, being that these tires are more street oriented, this does make it great for a commuter, or if you're just wanting to do general cruising. You can take this off-road as you want, as I did find it didn't do a bad job going off into some dirt trails that were relatively smoother, but you will find up at speeds it can get a little bit washy with the tires not being able to grip some of the finer dirt. Now if you do want to ride it a little bit more in off-road situations, you can actually let out a little bit of air pressure. This will help provide you with better grip on the dirt, but just keep in mind that the lower air pressure is actually going to take away a little bit of your range because you are going to have more drag. Now one thing that is nice about this scooter is the dual suspension. This does come with a hydraulic shock with a spring that is adjustable. Now one thing I found with me on it, the suspension was still even a little bit stiff, with the air pressure being at the higher side. Now for me, if I was going to constantly ride this just for general commuting, I would actually soften the spring rate just a little bit and probably drop it down a little bit. This is something that can be accomplished by taking the spring adjuster nut and turning it counterclockwise. This will lengthen the spring and soften the suspension up, so it'll actually make it a little bit more comfortable. But those who are a little bit more performance oriented, you may want to leave it a little bit stiffer, as this provides actually better performance when you are doing harder turns and riding the scooter more aggressively, especially if you happen to be using it for small little jumps and more. Not to mention, when it does come to the suspension on this, it does have a lot of clearance, and not to mention a decent swing arm to provide plenty of travel. So whether you are just going up and down curbs or wanting to ride this in the dirt, you do have all that travel to be able to make sure you're not bottoming out anywhere. Now, being that this scooter is more performance oriented, they also included hydraulic brakes. This gives your stopping experience much better than those of a cable brake. Now, cable brakes are a lot easier to service when it comes to maintenance wise, but these don't really require too much. You should be checking them about every 6 months just for pad wear, depending on how much you ride it. But the amount of stopping power that you get is much better when you have a hydraulic brake. Now, one of the benefits about this scooter is the padding that they put on top of your deck plate. This provides a decent amount of grip, but I did find is that a little bit of dust gets on there, it can get a little bit slick. But they also did put some padding on your footrest on the back. This provides you a nice area to rest your foot when you are riding just cruising, or if you are riding aggressively, this gives you somewhere where your foot isn't going to slip off. This way you have more control of the scooter during higher speeds, or if you are just cruising it around, it simply is a nice place to rest your foot. Another nice thing about this scooter is the display. The display is really easy to read, even in different lighting conditions. And they also made this to where if you want to turn on the scooter, you will need the NFC reader card. This is something you'll need to turn on the scooter, as this is a security feature, but you can add the NFC to your phone. That way you can just use your phone, as most people pretty much carry that around all the time, and you can unlock your scooter that way. Now, one thing with this scooter is that it is heavy. This is not going to be one of the scooters that you just throw in the back of your car, maybe in the back of your truck. This is 90 pounds, but with the weight being heavier, it actually provides more sense of confidence because the weight gives you better balance, which provides a better riding experience for beginners and also the more experienced riders. Now for me, I'm a little bit more performance oriented, and I even found this scooter to do well around turns and even foot placement on the deck. I was able to maneuver my feet most of the time into a correct position where I could take turns at high speeds. This provided a lot of fun, and there was plenty of power on this scooter when I needed to go up hills, down hills, or accelerate quickly. But when I was just cruising around, this also provided a really comfortable experience. Now, I have just over 50 miles on this scooter at the moment, but one thing I did find out is that while going into the settings, if you press the positive and the negative button, this will take you into the settings feature. If you press the wrong button, you can entirely erase your odometer reading. I had about 26 miles on here, and I completely erased it to 0, which I actually didn't know that was possible. So on my test right out, you can see I have about 23 miles on this and about 40% battery. Now, this was mainly on speed 3 the whole time, switching between either one motor or two motors. I would say I was in dual motor mode 40% of the time and single motor mode in about 60% of the time. So this would probably put my range into the low, maybe mid 30s, depending how conservative I was and also how many hills. Now, I live in an area where it's typically hot and there's a lot of hills, so most of the time I never get advertised, and it's normally about half, but I am also riding it pretty aggressively, so I can expect that. But if I was more conservative, I would definitely be able to get into the 30-mile range on this scooter, which is more than enough for most people. So I want to talk about a couple of the cons on this scooter. One of them is the grips. If you're just normally riding it, which most people are going to be doing, it's fine. But I did find for the aggressive riders like myself is that I can actually twist these grips to where they will rotate most of the way. So I found that they're going to need to either glue these down or at least put a bracket on each side to keep these from rotating. Another con, at least for me, because again, I am a little bit more of an aggressive rider, these bars are more set up for cruising. I wouldn't mind a bar setup that's a little bit straighter and maybe even a slightly wider grip. This actually gives you a little bit more control with the scooter, especially for the aggressive riders. Again, if you're a beginner or if you're just maybe intermediate cruising, this is purely a fine setup. I'm just going over some of the stuff that maybe some of the performance-oriented riders might want to know. Now, one of the small cons is actually the charger, but this is pretty common across many lines, is that you will get a charger that'll do 2.5 amps, but that is on the draw. So that means it's drawing 2.5 amps on AC, but you're only getting 2.0 amps on DC output. So this will draw about 280 watts, but it's gonna actually provide you less than 200 watts of actually power going into the battery. So I wouldn't mind seeing a better charger that has a little bit better efficiency on it. But again, this is something you find across all lines. So this is part of the technology that really hasn't changed much, is having a more efficient charger. Now, one other con too is that I would like to see latching system, because when you put this down, you can actually hit the screen on your footrest, and there really is nowhere to pick this up. So the best places to pick this up are going to be just behind the light and then right at the neck. But again, at 90 pounds, this is something most people are not going to want to be lifting, as 90 pounds is pretty heavy for a lot of people. Now, another small con some people talk about is the headlight, because it's not actually on the steering stem. I did cruise this around in the evening a few times and found it wasn't really that big of a deal. It would be nice if it was on the steering stem somewhere, that way the light was directional and it was going in the direction that you were going, but I don't find this as any kind of a deal breaker. And the light is actually plenty bright enough. At just about 10 watts, this provides enough light to where you can at least see where you're going. The aftermarket headlights are definitely a lot better, but this one is better than most of the ones you find on scooters. Now, when it comes to the pros on this scooter, is actually the build quality on this is really nice. The cable management is really good. This steering stem is high quality. It feels good. Even just riding the scooter in general, it feels quality. This doesn't feel like your normal kind of cheaper line scooter. This feels like it's worth what you're paying for. The overall riding experience is great. I've had a few people ride this and they actually said this was probably one of the best scooters they've ever ridden. Now, granted, there's always a new scooter that's going to come out, just like a new phone and more, but this is still one of the high quality scooters that you should look at, that should be on your top 3 list. Now, when it comes to the pricing on the Varla Eagle 1 Pro, you have to check because the prices do change all the time, but I will have links below plus discounts. And I hope this video helped you out in making a decision on the Varla Eagle 1 Pro, and I hope to see you guys in another video.